afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of Level Up Cyber. My name is Tony Bryan, your host and Executive Director of CyberUp, and looking forward to today's discussion. It's a little different, and it's a new friend for me today with Josh Copeland. I've been following him on LinkedIn for a little while, really enjoyed his content and said, man, I got to get this guy on the show. We got to have a conversation. So Josh, thanks for coming and joining us today. I'd love for you just to take a second, introduce yourself to the audience and really share about how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. I love being out here and doing these kind of things with folks that are doing the great things in cybersecurity realm. So Josh Copeland, I am a enterprise security director at Bose. For my day job, I'm also an adjunct professor at Tulane University teaching cybersecurity, all the things around cybersecurity, cyber laws, terrorism, leadership, and cryptography. So kind of a weird level of depth and breadth. My background comes, from the military. I was career Air Force for 20 years, did everything you can possibly think of in, military cybersecurity. I did help desk stuff, servers, routers, switches, ran a plethora of organizations, did PMOs, did pen tests, did all that kind of good stuff. When it came time for me to retire, moved to a great organization, ran some cloud platform security groups for federal gov customers for all the three-letter spooky agencies that do really cool stuff. Ran a MSP for a very large telco for state local government before I landed here with Bose. So kind of a very diverse background. Love education, love going out, seeing what's out there in the environment, what's out there as far as educational opportunities, both traditional and non-traditional, how we level up, to use your term, our folks and ourselves.
I like to plug the Level Up there. It's fantastic. So we're going to dive in a little bit today, and the topic of discussion is why does diversity matter, right? And when hiring for folks. So it might be a little weird. We're a couple Caucasian males here having this discussion today, but I think it's an important part where we're bringing a unique background from military and just years of experience, I think, where we can have a great discussion. I think come out with some really good advice for some folks, especially, watching Josh and your roles of hiring, for years within the industry, not just in your current role, but in the past and in the military, of just building well-rounded teams, right? So there's a lot of great information I know we'll glean from that. So let's just dive right into it, man. Given your background and all the things I just alluded to in your past career, why is it important? Why is looking at the diversity and makeup of your team such an important factor when building out your organization?
So I love the fact that you brought up the fact that it's, two Caucasian males that are talking about diversity. And I think that's important because we now see that that's a huge value. It's not something that a person of color or a minority or a woman has to advocate for. We see that as something that's valuable too. And I'll tell you why it's valuable, particularly in cybersecurity. It is not something that is just valuable. It's absolutely, positively critical to cybersecurity. You get a lot of times with cybersecurity where you hire folks who are all college educated with the same certifications, the same backgrounds, and what you get is a pretty big echo chamber within that environment. You all look at the same problems from the same perspectives, and you don't see the same vulnerabilities. When you bring in diversity, when you bring in folks from different backgrounds with different capabilities, when you're bringing in kind of all these different pieces and parts, you get a 360 view of your cybersecurity posture. And you're looking at it from kind of all these different unique perspectives. And when you do that, you are truly more secure, which means that cybersecurity, when it comes to diversity, is not just, a nice thing to have. It's not something that you put on your corporate, metrics saying that, yes, we've increased our diversity by this number. It's an absolute critical thing to the actual security of your organization.
It's agreed. It's at the different perspectives, the different mindsets. And I also just want to take that a step further because I think a lot of times around the diversity word, it generally centers around the idea of just race and gender, right? And that is, I want to say it's not short-sighted, but there's more layers to that idea around diversity, right? And we talked about it a little bit as we were getting ready for today. Diversity in the job experiences, life experiences, maybe small town, city, all of those attributes for somebody bring to the table a different perspective, to your point of what things may exist, and you're going to have a better well-rounded answer. So I always just think of the sectors they came from, whether it be the service industry, the military, what what attributes when you look at your hiring, where are you focusing yourself on where you're finding your diverse candidates that you're trying to bring into your teams?
So I'm looking for that very diverse mindset. When you think about it, it's not so much, what you've done, it's how do those skills overlap. So I look at folks particularly if I'm hiring, entry level folks, folks who have been medics, folks who have been law enforcement, marketing professionals, accountants, all bring like a little special skill set that they honed and built up from those other jobs. Medics are amazing at triage. What is the first and foremost skill of any SOC analyst is the ability to triage what the alert is, determine what's important, what needs to be fixed right now, what can be wait, what you can do now versus what can be done later. Law enforcement folks, they're trained investigators. That's what your SOC does. They investigate. One of the best analysts I've ever hired was a guy who had an undergraduate degree in marketing. And I kind of get strange looks when people hear that. And I go, well, let's look at this from a skill set perspective. If I'm looking at social engineering and what the skill sets of social engineering are, and compare that to the skill sets of somebody who is really good at marketing, there's almost a 90% overlay of those two skills. They're both trying to get you to do whatever it is that they want you to do by social engineering you, using your psychology to make you do the thing that they want. Marketing is generally getting you to buy a product or go to an individual place. On cybersecurity, they're trying to get you to click a button, share a password, give some kind of access that you shouldn't be giving out. But the skill sets are exactly the same. Accountants are absolutely fabulous in cybersecurity because they're so detail oriented, because that's where their background came from. So much so that one of the premier attestations that an organization as a service provider can get is the SOC 2 Type 2 audit, which was founded by accountants. So when you kind of look at those perspectives, you can go, that's really, all these different things that I'm not going to get from somebody who went to a Ivy League university, got a Security Pulse or CYSA, and is coming to me straight from, a pipeline school. Folks from the military are absolutely fabulous because they understand kind of hierarchy, they understand rank structure, they're adaptable and they're independent and they're able to do kind of things in ways that folks who don't have that experience might not be able to. I even move it even kind of the nudge further, and folks who have disabilities are absolutely phenomenal because the things that some folks would see as liabilities might be their superpower. I look at folks who have autism, and the things that would make them maybe not suitable for more, public facing roles make them absolutely great at, hyper focusing on a particular problem until you figure out what the fix is. The opportunity that cyber provides, largely because it's a job that can be done remotely, gives the opportunity to folks who might not have access to a job somewhere else. It's 2024 and we're, a couple of decades past the American Disabilities Act. But how many places are truly wheelchair accessible? Cybersecurity allows you to work from home, so you can have folks who have mobility issues, folks who have adaptive technologies that are out there that allow them to do all the great things. There's a great company out of Kansas, Nova Coast, that's doing stuff to train blind SOC analysts. So you have kind of all these different things that, when you put them together, builds a team that has just such a great view of cybersecurity as a whole.
I love the idea. And I'm going to take the question, my next question, maybe just a little bit further. So we've seen a large increase over the last, 4 or 5 years from corporations, creating intentional D&I teams, appointing folks, to lead D&I efforts. And there seems to be a trend where some of that's kind of getting walked back, right? It seems like, they're not yielding the results that they had hoped with some of the programs. So there's a little bit of a reassessment of how to make it work. As you look at that and some of what the trend is for some of these corporations, where did we miss in some of these things over the last couple of years? And, what could we look ahead to maybe reimagine those efforts? And, it makes me sad to think that some of that was lost because it was all really well intentioned, but I think that we're missing a couple pieces to that. So what were we missing, and what do we need to be successful with it going forward?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and it goes back to intentionalism. What is my intent of these programs? If the intent is just purely to be diverse for the sake of being diverse, it's always going to fail because you're going to be hiring based purely on those categories rather than hiring on diversity because it adds to your company's organization, it adds to your culture, it adds to your capabilities. And when you look at it from that perspective, diversity is a byproduct of good hiring versus a thing that you're doing as part of your hiring.
Absolutely. I know we talked a little bit right before we hopped on about, I believe, there was, we had a little bit of a cart before the horse with some of the efforts that we had over the last couple of years. Beyond policies and appointments, right? We really got to look at what is the core process and component of just hiring. And that really, it starts with your talent acquisition. A lot, you just alluded to it a little bit of where you're looking. And then, how are you structuring those roles and opportunities, and how are they designed and created? Are those roles and opportunities made in a way that when you do find partners like you alluded to in Kansas and those type of organizations that will support those hires? Because if we don't start at that beginning part with credentials, certification, degree requirements, it really makes it hard to go and find partners that would meet those requirements to intent. And I think far too often, a lot of times, at least I know for us, is that we're asking people to lessen their requirements, and that's not the case. We're asking them to determine their requirements and allow us an opportunity to take people to that level, right, to help them hit those goals. So that's really been kind of an advocacy part of that, and this idea of just truly building out a program or organization that embraces skills-based hiring and what that actually means. So when you hear the word skills-based hiring, I'd be curious, what does that kind of mean to you, and how would that work within an organization that you would lead?
You bring up a great point, and it's one of the very first things that I do when I look at job descriptions when I'm getting ready to hire is I take what my predecessor, what HR gives me, and I look at it and go, this is probably not what I actually need. Someone went out somewhere and copied and pasted job description from the same job title, or it's super old, not accurate, not current to what we're doing. And I take out and basically rewrite it. And what I look to do for job descriptions is write it in such a way that it is something I can use to grade the person on a year later. And by doing that, you change all of these artificial requirements of a bachelor's degree and CISP and 15 other certifications, and you get into the things that are actually important to the job and what the job really requires. And when you start doing that, you're opening the aperture to the folks that can actually apply to the roles. Because one of the unfortunate statistics is, particularly if you're a woman or a minority, unless you meet 100% of the things listed in that job application, they're less likely to apply. Well, anybody that's been a hiring manager will tell you that when I write a job description, I'm asking for a pink unicorn with a purple horn, rainbow colored hair, sparkle hooves, with iridescent wings and a security padlock as a cutie mark on the hip. But what I'll really take is a pink pony. So making sure that we're writing those job descriptions where we're advocating for the right folks to apply by not overindulging in the things that we want, by making sure that we're removing barriers that aren't necessary. Do I really need a certification requirement? Is the certification I'm asking for actually appropriate for the job I'm asking the person to do? If I'm asking somebody to be a identity access management person, do they really need CISP? Do I really need CISM? Maybe I want them to have something that's more targeted to that role, that is a lower certification, easier to achieve, or do they even need a certification at all? That's kind of a perspective that you have to take in rewriting your job description and understanding what's really needed for the role, and not take for granted that, all the things that you're asked for are truly achievable.
That's a great point. I feel like somebody wrote a job description 10 years ago, and that poor job description has been cut and pasted in forever, over and over again. It has continued to haunt everybody at the same time. As you look across, I think the idea of, we're talking a little bit about what corporations and companies could do to create an environment, but I also think there's another step that's to that. The organizations, you're in Louisiana, I'm in Missouri. There's important aspects that our region or states should be doing to really ready the workforce and create more skilled people, right? To close that skills gap, to create more skilled people. What areas or partnerships have you sought out over the years, within your own community and kind of your backyard to find those programs or opportunities to even, to find those diverse candidates that would be able to come and apply for your opportunities?
Yeah, it's all about going to find, where the sources of talent could be. Community colleges are absolutely fantastic ways to get, entry-level cybersecurity talent. The cost for entry into a community college is typically very, very low. It's very, technology-focused programs. They provide kind of that very rapid skill up that I'm getting someone who, what I'm looking for from a college graduate, someone who can read, someone who can write, has some critical thinking, and then they actually have some legitimate hands-on technical skill, and I'm able to kind of funnel them in. Looking at programs like, Cyber Patriot and supporting those from a organizational perspective, where you're getting folks who are early in their journey into figuring out what they want to do. You're getting them interested in cybersecurity, not just from the cool, I'm going to build a robot, but you're actually having them do legitimate cybersecurity things, small regional conferences, regional CTFs, capture the flags, hackathons, all these things that you can pull people in and get them interested, and then use those to kind of pull back in and say, well, these are great sources for us to kind of come back into. I serve on the advisory board of a HBCU that's here local in Shreveport. And they have a huge focus on building these kinds of skills out for folks who would go to a HBCU university, because it's a great way for them to step up and create new opportunities in areas that might not otherwise exist.
For those that haven't been paying attention to HBCUs, they have been incredibly well funded over the past 8 years and have made some amazing progress on their programs, their curriculum education, and their attendance is killing it right now for HBCUs across the country. So if you haven't, looked at those as opportunities like Josh has over the years, you're likely missing an opportunity, because there's a lot of great programs that have been developed. Harris Stowe here in St. Louis has done a bang-up job of just adding cybersecurity and technology roles and attracting students. So it's been a really good way to grow diversity through HBCUs. As you look kind of ahead to what the next 5 to 10 years looks like in this world of, how can we hit, and I'll even take a step back. In the past 8 years since I've been, in this space advocating, we've definitely seen some progress. One, the data gets released less and less frequently, I think because of COVID, of just, how much progress we're making towards women and the percentage in the industry and people of color in the industry. What do you think, how do you think we get further along in this, or what's that kind of next step or iteration we have, right? There's been lots of great programs like CyberUp and community colleges and HBCUs, but what are we missing to really hit, kind of full stride of this effort?
So when you look at the statistics, kids of all ages and backgrounds in middle school are highly into STEM. STEM being kind of the overarching thing that leads into cybersecurity, as well as a plethora of other fields. But as they start getting into high school, that interest wanes, whether it's because there's some institutional things, there's some, gender biases one way or the other of, girls don't do cybersecurity or boys don't do, English lit as a major, getting it at that point and re-engaging those folks at that level and continuing that interest from middle school onto high school and then into the, entry level workforce, college, military background, so on and so forth. That's where the real change is going to have to occur if you really want to see this grow. Because we're seeing largely in programs for career changers, all the folks who lost interest in STEM from the middle school to high school transition are a lot of the folks who are doing the career transition from all those other jobs back into STEM at that career change kind of role, because they were always truly interested in it, but some barrier led them to go down not that path until much later in life. So if we can kind of focus in on that, middle school to high school area to get folks really engaged and energized about the things that cybersecurity, IT, and technology can do for you as a person, for a career, and for the world as a whole, the better we're going to be, and the more diverse we're going to be as a industry.
Yeah, I think probably one of my prouder accomplishments for us over the years isn't labeled in the number of jobs we created or the number of people we train. It's really centered in when I go to networking events now, right? We had a InfoGuard Day of Cyber yesterday, on our meetups of the evening. The makeup and diversity of those efforts those groups and meetups have substantially changed over the last 4 or 5 years, right? Like we've made St. Louis as a whole has made leaps and bounds progress in just the diversity of people attending these meetups and just exposure to industries, and that comes from a little bit to what you just said, right? Having conversations with students in middle school about Cyber Patriot, having conversations with nonprofit organizations and settlement houses who are serving neighborhoods and communities, that have sometimes been overlooked in those areas. So how do you really build trust in communities and really do it? So that part's been fun for me to see the kind of growth and progression. So there's one piece that's always kind of stuck out in my head. There's companies have different challenges or needs when they're trying to hire, right? Like I think of a CrowdStrike or an Arctic Wolf. They're large vendors that when they post a job, they're getting hundreds and hundreds of applications because they're like, everybody wants to go work because they're cool. They do cool stuff. And then you have other, manufacturers and groups that don't get 300 applications and they maybe get 5 or 10. The economies of scale and the process of those two are very different, right? So we'll start with the large companies. So when you work for a company like a Bose, who probably is, everybody knows what you guys do, you're probably getting quite a few applications. How are you sorting through those? What's that process look like to get you to a final where you start to interview, and then making sure that you're incorporating the idea of diversity behind that selection and process? That question makes sense. I'll make sure I was clear in that.
Yeah, I get it. A lot of it comes down to, I'm a big advocate of networking. Network. Most jobs that are out there's a stat out there, 70% of all jobs that are actively available are not advertised. You have to know somebody to even be able to apply for it. So that's your first step. And that's how you find out about those jobs of, it's a small company that they're only going to get 5 applicants and you're not one of a mass of 1,000 people that applied for CrowdStrike. So that's a huge piece to that. Now, on the other hand, getting those applicants, it's really going through and figuring out, looking for how well does that applicant's total background, not just job title, not just keywords, not just the kind of the things that are 100% matches. If the job description says that you need to have, 5 years experience with Splunk, maybe looking at the resume and I see, 5 years experience with Devo. Well, Devo is another SIM, and a SIM is kind of a SIM. Do I really need 5 years experience with a particular product, or I just need 5 years experience with, that kind of product? And what does that 5 years experience even mean? I had one person who, when I was hiring for a Tenable engineer, both people had, listed themselves as Tenable SMEs. One person had 5 years experience and the other person had 2 years experience. But the person who had 5 years experience worked in a DoD environment and had kind of did the same 3 things over and over again for 5 years. So they really had 1 year experience times 5. Compared to the other guy who had 2 years experience, but in that 2 years, he had built out 3 full Tenable enclaves, including ground up builds, doing custom configuration, custom compliance monitoring, all the things that you'd want. So they really had probably 10 years of experience smashed into 2 years. And looking at resumes and reading those differences is really where it comes down to understanding, what does experience really mean? What does certification really mean? What does education really mean? I look at college degrees and I see that you can, do long-term planning, you have some project management, you probably worked at a team, you can write, you can read, and you have some critical thinking. Do I really care what your major is? Not terribly. By the time you graduate, the stuff you learned as a freshman was up to 10 years old. So in cybersecurity, that's really, really old. So looking at those things of what makes you a valuable add to the team, do you have a background that's unique? It's going to bring kind of that next level of ability to the team, and getting kind of in that nitty gritty is kind of where you get the real wins when you're trying to build teams. And then, diversity tends to be the byproduct of building that team.
It's a great answer. I actually really like that answer a lot. I appreciate you sharing that. As you look ahead, I'm gonna say, let's look back. We look back at, kind of the last couple of years. Have there been any kind of lessons learned from you, or any type of, things that you look back and think, man, I need to be better at that, or I need to do, to try to figure that, some self-reflection in those moments?
For me, kind of the biggest thing I've learned over probably the last 5 years is the more I know, the less I know. And that has been just kind of beat in my head from early in my career, but even highlighted more as I've kind of progressed into more senior roles, is that you're going to have larger and larger scope, but shorter and shorter depth in those things. And you have to understand that you're not always going to be the guy at the keyboard doing the thing. Sometimes you just have to understand what they're doing and be able to give them the support, the training, and the tools to do what they want and what they need to do for your organization. So as you kind of progress, the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know. It's kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, that first year that you're in cybersecurity, it's like, oh my God, I know everything. And then as you progress, you go, oh, I really don't know anything at all. Yeah. And you learn more and more and more, and then you learn all the other things you don't know. And that becomes kind of the byword of understanding what you don't know. And that's kind of, to me, the hallmark of true professional is they know what they know, but more importantly, they know what they don't know and how to get information on that.
That's another great answer. I think for me, some of it is just in assumptions, right? I feel like, I know what's best for other people because this is what there's a one size fits all approach for this, and it's going to work. And then the reality is, as much effort as CyberUp has continued to do and people we've trained, there's not a single one size fits all way to take somebody through it. There's so many variables and background experiences, and that, which I think is what makes this whole discussion and diversity important in this, is that's the secret sauce of this. So, being open-minded, taking, eliminating that, assumptions in some of these things, and thinking you always know what's best, and just be open to asking questions for other people, learning from their experiences, and really trying to immerse yourself in understanding of other perspectives really makes you well-rounded. And to me, I think a better hiring manager, because you're going to come at it from a different lens of just your own, right? So that part's been a lot of fun. So we're coming close to time, which is crazy. 30 minutes always goes too fast. What advice would you give to somebody to level up their cybersecurity career?
Do lots of research. Go out and look at the different jobs that are out there, particularly in cybersecurity. There are dozens and dozens of different types of roles, and the requirements for each one of them are vastly different. So figure out what you want to do and target yourself towards that, and figure out what's the best way through there. That involves talking to folks, getting out there, talking to folks who are in that role, talking to folks who have moved on from that role to next level roles, and kind of having those connections, because that's what's really going to help you grow as an individual and truly level up.
I just want to say thank you, right? I appreciated the discussion today, right? I think, back to the first point, it is important for folks that look like you and I to have this conversation, especially more you, right? You're managing a team of 50 folks, right? And you have lots of hiring importance, so for other CISOs and directors of these security teams to lean into these discussions is really important. And I think hopefully others will tune in and just understand some of the opportunities that we have ahead of us for these roles. And I won't speak for you, but I imagine, would you be open if people want to reach out, ask questions, and do some of that networking online and LinkedIn after this? Would be great. You open to that?
Absolutely. My LinkedIn inbox is open to anybody, and I will more than happy to have chats with folks who have a true interest in cybersecurity and want to grow.
Yeah, the asterisk I put on that. Josh is a busy guy. He's got a lot going on. So when you're come with intentionality and a purpose and kind of an end in sight, right? And come with a very direct question, just to be mindful of that to get that back. So, man, I really enjoyed the discussion. It's been great. One, just getting to know you. Two, diving into a talking point that I think some people just generally have a tendency to shy away from, but a very important discussion as we look ahead to grow in this workforce. So thanks for that. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for everybody listening. Until we see you again, I appreciate you and have a great week. Thank you, guys.